The Dragonback series by Timothy Zahn. Book 5. Dragon and Judge. Chapter 18. The next morning, Allison had just finished dressing when Dumbarton and Mershpaw arrived at her door. "They're ready for you," Dumbarton said. "What, no breakfast?" Allison asked. "They've got something there," Dumbarton said, jerking a thumb over his shoulder as the Brumga scooped up her bag of disguised burglar equipment. Come on, they're waiting." They went back upstairs, across the main foyer, and up a wide staircase to a second-floor balcony. From there, they walked down a nicely furnished corridor, then up another set of stairs, and finally to a domed chamber the size of a small conference room, only much more nicely furnished. As Dumbarton had said, Neverland and Frost were waiting for her. They were seated in comfortable chairs beside a line of 5 safes, looking rather like spectators at some sporting event. Along the side wall, a small breakfast buffet had been laid out, with both hot and cold food. The aromas rising from it made Allison's stomach growl. Over in the far corner, seated in a chair that looked rather like a throne, was an old, wrinkled, glowering Brumga. "Morning, Kana," Frost greeted her with a snort of gruff politeness. "Ready to start?" "As soon as I've eaten something," Allison told him, nodding over at the old Brumga. "Who's your friend?" An instant later, a hard blow across her shoulder blade sent her sprawling flat onto the thick carpet. "Hey!" she yelped, rolling back up into a sitting position and glaring up at the 2 mercenaries behind her. "What was that?" She broke off, throwing herself into a diving roll that barely managed to get her out of the way as Mershpaw swiped at her again. "Mershpaw, stand down!" Frost snapped. But the other ignored him. Taking a long step toward Allison, he raised his hand for another try. "Patry, call him off," Neverland said quietly. "We need her alive and unharmed." There was no order that Allison could hear, but to her relief, Mershpaw jerked to a halt. For a moment, he glowered down at her, then stepped back to Dumbarton's side. Breathing hard, Allison turned her head to look up at the old Brumga. He was gazing back at her from his throne, his face expressionless. "Does it have learned respect?" he rumbled. Allison took a careful breath. "I humbly crave the pardon of the Patry Chukuk," she said. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw Frost stir a little at the subtle edge of sarcasm beneath the words. Fortunately, the Patry Chukuk didn't seem to hear it. "You can stand," he said. "Thank you." Keeping a wary eye on Mershpaw, Allison got to her feet under her and stood up. Jack had told her about his casual mistreatment of here at the Chukuk estate. She should have been ready for some of the same. "Now, shall we try it again?" Neverland asked. "Are you ready to begin?" Allison glanced sideways at the Patry. "I will begin at your pleasure," she said. "May I humbly suggest that I'll do better if I'm allowed to eat first?" "You may indeed so suggest." Neverland turned to the Patry. "Patry?" "It were is better," the Patry rumbled. "Allow it to eat." Neverland gestured to the buffet. "Go ahead." "Thank you," Allison said, bowing to each of the 3 in turn before crossing over to the food. It irritated her no end to have to play this kind of humility game, especially in front of a creature who made his money buying and selling living beings. But the very first thing her father had taught her was not to let emotion get in the way of the job. If it took a little groveling to get what she wanted out of these people, she could handle that. She ate a quick breakfast, making sure to thank the Patry twice more between bites, and then set to work. The safes were trickier, though not quite as bad as the ones she'd opened aboard ship, and it took the entire day to get them open. But by the time the sun was sinking behind the white wall, even Neverland was convinced. "Excellent," he said as he peered into the last of the empty safes and then closed the door again. "You were right, Colonel. She does seem to have some talent in this area." "Or at least some very good equipment," Frost said.
Either serves our purposes.
Neverland turned to the old Brumga.
Patry.
For a long moment, the Patry continued to stare at Allison, as he'd done pretty much non-stop the entire day.
It may try,
he said.
Excellent,
Neverland said.
Colonel.
Frost gestured, and Dumbarton and Mershpaw detached themselves from a section of the wall near the door.
Escort her back to her room,
he ordered.
Instruct the slaves to get her whatever she wants for dinner.
He shifted his attention to Allison.
You'll start first thing in the morning,
he added.
I suggest you get to bed early and get yourself a good night's sleep.
His eyes narrowed in silent warning.
You'll need it.
With their entire day having been spent in the testing room, Tanim hadn't had a chance to eat anything since the previous evening. Allison made sure to order a large dinner, then left the Kada hiding under the bed while she had herself a quick bath to soothe away her tension. She was dried and dressed by the time the meal arrived, brought in again by Shufti Lee. The young Westwalk was polite enough, but there was none of the simmering hope and enthusiasm he'd shown the previous evening. He accepted her thanks for the food, told her he'd overheard nothing new from Neverland or Frost, and left. After they'd eaten, with Tanim reluctantly but gratefully taking most of the food, Allison settled down for that good night's sleep Neverland had recommended. She'd been asleep just over 2 hours when a sudden hissing roar in her ear jerked her awake.
What is it?
Tanim whispered anxiously. It's all right, Allison whispered back, forcing her muscles to relax. Ever since Neverland had taken Virgil Morgan's shoulder bag from her, she'd been waiting for him to open it. She'd therefore gone to bed each of the past 2 nights with the receiver from the bugged picture nestled in her ear. Apparently, the moment had come. The brief roar of paper rubbing against paper faded away to be replaced by the sound of a familiar human voice.
Know what you expect to find in there,
Frost was saying.
Or why you even care about Morgan anymore. We've got the girl, and she's at least as good as he is.
The question is whether we have her or whether she has us,
Neverland said pointedly.
I don't like the fact that we can't pull up a single clue as to who she really is.
Which argues that she's exactly what she claims to be,
Frost countered.
Only an especially good professional thief would be able to keep her data and stats out of the system.
There was a tickling on Allison's neck as Tanim slid around her skin, angling for a spot where she could hear better. She ended up with her triangular dragon's head stretched partway across Allison's own face, her ear just below the receiver.
Maybe,
Neverland said.
Well.
What is it?
Frost asked.
It seems our master safecracker Virgil Morgan has been thinking about changing specialties.
To what?
There was a faint crinkling of paper.
To blackmail.
Yeah, I saw those pictures,
Frost said.
I couldn't quite make out what was happening.
Obviously, neither could Morgan,
Neverland said.
Or else he was smart enough to know the police wouldn't be able to figure them out either. I wonder where he got them.
What are they?
Frost asked.
Pictures placing me at a little problem we had a few years back on, well, as a matter of fact, right there on Semaline,
Neverland said. There was another shuffling of papers.
All these other papers are from the same thing. Interesting.
Just how little was this problem?
Frost asked.
Specifically, can Morgan call the cops down on us?
The cops would first have to find us,
Neverland said.
Assuming you hid the Advocatus Diabli properly, that's not likely to happen. Besides,
there was a rustling of papers.
We've got all of his evidence.
Unless he has more.
Unlikely,
Neverland said.
It's clear that he's been adding to his collection over the years. No, I think everything's probably here in this one nice, neat package.
Allison nodded to herself. So that was the reason for the SNA's occasional visits to Semaline. Jack's uncle hadn't been taking money out of the lockbox, as Jack had thought. He'd instead been putting new blackmail material in.
And what if he has copies?
Frost persisted.
I suppose that's possible.
Neverland conceded, a hint of doubt creeping into his tone.
Though these are definitely the originals.
You'd better hope so,
Frost warned.
because the fact that after 11 years the Judge Paladin has suddenly shown up and tripped your alarms ought to make you pause for thought.
I suppose you're right,
Neverland said in a voice that sent a shiver up Allison's back.
There's no point in taking chances, especially not now. The next time Bolo checks in, I'll order him to wreck the mine.
Will that be enough?
Frost asked.
It'll bury any evidence of motive,
Neverland said.
That, plus the fact that Morgan doesn't have his original documents anymore, ought to do it.
I meant, do you think you should also do something about the Judge Paladin?
Frost said.
Braxton's making enough noise out there without the Judge Paladin's office letting itself in on the act.
I suppose you're right there, too,
Neverland conceded.
Then it's not like Bolo hasn't killed a Judge Paladin before. He can handle the job.
There was another hiss of paper sliding over each other.
Meanwhile, we have a busy day tomorrow.
Neverland's voice continued, sounding more distant. Apparently, he'd put the papers back into the shoulder bag.
I think I'll check once more on the girl's record search, then get to bed.
Good idea,
Frost said, and there was a subtle double creaking of leather as both men stood up.
because I've seen her before,
he added, his voice fading away.
I know I have.
You'd better figure out where,
Neverland warned, his voice fading the same way.
And fast.
There was the sound of a door closing and then silence. Allison waited another minute to make sure they weren't coming back. Then, grimacing, she pulled the receiver from her ear. You get all that? She whispered.
Yes,
Tanim said, sliding back to her usual place across Allison's back, legs, and arms.
This sounds very bad.
It'll be all right, Allison said, forcing a confidence she didn't especially feel. So far, Neverland seemed to be concentrating his search on Internos and alien databases, official as well as criminal. If he stayed with those, she should be fine. But if it occurred to Frost to dig into the Malison Ring's own database...
What was that?
Tanim whispered suddenly. Allison froze. Straining her ears, she could just make out a faint sound that might possibly be distant human speech. Someone coming down the hallway toward her room? And then suddenly she understood. Mouthing a silent curse at her own stupidity, she jammed the receiver back into her ear. It was indeed where the voice was coming from. To her dismay, though, while the sound became louder, it didn't become any more understandable. Only random and disconnected syllables seemed to be getting through the soft but persistent hiss of background noise. There wasn't even enough for her to identify the voice, though she was pretty sure it wasn't Frost or Neverland. She turned her head back and forth, trying to adjust the receiver's position for better reception, but nothing seemed to help.
It's Uncle Verge,
Tanim said abruptly. Allison frowned, straining her ears even harder. The Kada was right, she realized abruptly, which meant the SNA was somewhere nearby, probably just outside the Chukuk family grounds. Can you understand him? She whispered.
No,
Tanim whispered back.
it's too faint, too
broken, Allison finished for her. Throwing off the blanket she grabbed for her clothes. Come on.
Where are we going?
Tanim asked anxiously. We're 2 floors underground, Allison reminded her, pulling on her jeans and shirt. We should get better reception outside.
But are you allowed to leave the house?
Allison stuffed her feet into her low-topped boots. Let's find out,